You have an idea. You want to tell it to the world, but you don't know where to start. That's where Anchor comes in. They have the tools for you to edit, produce, and record your idea right from your phone or computer. It's the easiest way to reach and grow your audience. They publish for you to Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and all major platforms. And to top it all off, they match you with advertisers so you can earn from your passion and your wonderful idea. So tell me, what are you waiting for? Download the Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started and follow your dream.
Last time on Disruptive Adventism, we saw the value of therapy, and we sat down with Kim Cove to talk about this important topic. Today, we take a little bit of a different shift, and we're going to be sitting down and talking with Tiffany Llewellyn. Tiffany, she will be enlightening us about the topic of therapy from a different perspective. And we have her here with us. So how's it going, Tiffany?
It's going well. How are you?
Doing well. It's a busy Friday, but we're making it. So hopefully things are going to go well. So before we get into the topic of therapy and, a couple of other things, help our audience know who you are and what are you passionate for?
Yeah, sure. So I currently work as a clinical instructor at Yale University. I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I have been doing social work my entire career. Since I was 12 years old, I knew that this is what I wanted to do. And so that's the journey that I pursued. I work as an in-home therapist for children and adolescents with severe psychiatric disorders who are being discharged from institutions such as the detention facility, inpatient hospitalization, residential, whatever that might be. And I also work as a psych clinician in the emergency room at a hospital here in Connecticut as well. Additionally, I am extremely passionate about community work, social justice, and so I did found Adventist for Social Justice in 2016. And so those are just a couple of the things that I am incredibly passionate about, and exploring ways in which racism, injustices impact mental health, and what we as a community can do about it.
It seems to me that you wear a lot of hats, and that's a good thing. You're working with different communities, children, adolescents, even adults, that may have mental illnesses or mental backgrounds or, different problems in their life. Now, a lot of people, and we talked a little bit with about this with Kim in the previous interview, a lot of people are very prone to reject therapy or mental help from a professional. Why do you think that is? We got a little bit of Kim's answer last time, but you have a little bit of a different perspective. You work with a different kind of crew. So what is it? Do you see the people that you counsel with and that you help, do they reject it as well? Is it embedded in children and in other, teenagers as well as adults?
Yeah, I think it really depends on the space that we're in, right? Like, I think there's been this long-standing history of stigma surrounding mental health for numerous reasons, and I think that stigma is probably more prevalent in minority communities, so Black communities, Latino communities. There is a stigma attached to mental health and all these really derogatory terms that has been attached to it. So we've seen or heard people be called crazy or, like going off or just all these different sorts of labels. And so even from a religious perspective or a spiritual perspective, it's been aligned with demon possession. And so there's a rejection of mental health in general in a lot of communities. I think for a long time as well, mental health has had a predominantly white face or white look. And so there's not necessarily been culturally sensitive or culturally competent models that sort of makes mental health a comfortable conversation to have in different spaces. And so a lot of people are resistant to embracing the fact that mental health is incredibly prevalent and real and present in all of our lives and all of our families and many of us ourselves. The statistics doesn't lie. So whether we want to, embrace it or not, it is what it is. And I think that there's been so much shame and negativity attached to mental health for so long. And that's a part of why people continue to reject or just sort of distance themselves from that thought.
Now, you work with children and you work at, kind of like an intensive care or like care units, right? And you also said that you work with minority groups, like, especially kind of understanding what's the effect of mental health, or, what effects does racism have on mental health? Can you share a little bit about that? That sounds very interesting to me. And especially, how does it relate to children?
Yeah. So I am going back to sort of wearing just too many hats at this point. I'm also a student right now. I'm a doctoral student at the University of Southern California. Very close to ending. And my research is primarily based around race-based trauma. And so what I have been researching and looking at for the past few years is how does racism impact mental health? And this body of work is newly emerging. We're beginning to explore when we talk about racial policing, when we talk about, discrimination that people that identify in various minority groups face on a daily basis. How does that impact one's mental health, one's sense of self, and so forth? And so what the research is showing is that my research is primarily focused on the Black community, so I'll speak to that. But what it's showing is that Black individuals experience higher levels of depression, of anxiety, of stress, just based on their racial identity. We can look at examples of just driving on the street and the fear that escalates if a Black individual sees a police officer. We can talk about the presence of police officers, or even in places of employment where people are facing discrimination or maybe overlooked for certain positions, etc., and how that adds to depression. Research is showing that Black individuals require an additional 1 to 7 days, mental health days per month, just based on their mental health, deteriorating mental health. Some newer research that I've been doing that's, linked to more young people. When we look at different policies, stop and frisk, just presence within the community, fear of safety, fear of, will I make it home alive? Fear of, how am I being perceived in society when I go outside? There is research that is showing that at night, Black individuals, their heart rate does not decrease and I'm not a health professional in terms of physical health, but it seems like there's a baseline that everyone's sort of rate, blood pressure rate, heart rate drops to at night while sleeping. And for Black individuals, that never decreases. And so there is this continuous escalation when we look at various mental health challenges, from depression to anxiety to stress, and then how that can manifest itself in a lot of different ways, where there's this intersection of racism and injustice and its impact on the mental health of Black and I'm sure other minority groups. The challenge is, though, that because, like you mentioned earlier, we are not embracing mental health, we're not talking about it, it's been so destigmatized in our communities that we don't even have the language to be able to name what is occurring. And so within Black communities, and I'll also parallel to, I'm sure this occurs in other minority communities where racism is just as prevalent. There is, this is sort of like the accepted way of life. And so we are embracing these levels of stress and anxiety and depression as normative and not receiving treatment. And then it is impacting our quality of life and our life expectancy. So we're basically killing ourselves, because we're not dealing with the mental health issue.
That sounds like a very difficult way of getting out of there. Like kind of if a minority group or, has certain responses, but they're not willing to have the language and to kind of have the help, there are less possibilities to get out of that system, that kind of cycle, I guess,
Absolutely.
Now,
I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. That's fine. But I kind of wanted to frame it. I mean, since you work with children, is this also shown in children? Like, this research that you talk about, does it occur in children as well? Given that, they may not be aware of, as much as an adult, some children are, more aware of the, kind of social conditions of their parents, or, how the government or, how other people groups may relate to them. How does because, usually we think of children as innocent. We think that they may not understand all of the, racial profiling or, maybe some of the policy makers or whatever it is. They just live their lives. But do children also show this? Are they also,
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. What we are seeing in kids, or at least what I'm seeing in kids that I work with that come from communities of color, is we're seeing the behaviors and it's being mislabeled. So we're seeing kids going into schools, or even in their homes, incredibly disruptive behaviors, their own anxieties. A lot of times kids are anxious, they're nervous, they're scared, and they don't have the language to be able to, explain that or describe that. They just act it out. And there's been a number of clients from communities of color that I have worked with, who, when you probe a little bit further, you'll hear them talk about hearing gunshots at night, they'll talk about their own fears for their family members. Maybe they have a family member that's been incarcerated. Maybe they're watching the news. I'm sorry. They're exposed to social media. Many of our kids are online, and so they're receiving the news report. They're hearing the conversations. They're present in their communities, and they know what's going on, but they don't know how to process that. But it does raise their anxiety. It raises their stress. It raises their sadness levels. And so we're seeing the behaviors. But if there's not, if they're not working with individuals, whether it's teachers or even parents or church leaders or whoever it is that understands the impact of racism on life, then we're not going to know how to interpret kids' behaviors. And so what I've seen is by, bringing this sort of lens and perspective into the conversation and talking to parents about it and talking to school staff and things like that about it, now they are able to understand children's behaviors in different ways. And so it's really helping our kids to find the language to talk about what's going on in their communities so that we can understand their behaviors differently.
Now, is the church playing a role in this? Does religious behaviors, not necessarily Adventist, but I'm talking about just religion as a whole, does it help or is it hindering some of this conversation around the need for mental health for children or, for different people, groups, like minorities?
I think that the church has not helped, if I could be completely honest. And
why is that?
The church has contributed to the stigmatization of mental health. because it's been labeled as demon possession. And so in church spaces, what we have continuously heard is that we just need to pray it away. And so there are no conversations around, well, let me not say there are none. I think that the culture is changing a bit, but it's very new where in certain church spaces, mental health is becoming a conversation. We've not seen that before. And so I think the church has done a lot of damage that a lot of people who are Christians, a lot of parents who are Christians of young kids don't identify the behaviors, the experiences as a mental health issue. So they just probably see it as behavioral. They just think the kid or the individual is bad, is crazy, needs God, needs prayer, is not spiritually in tune. And if we just pray it away, then they'll get better. And so I think the church has a huge responsibility at this point to reverse that sort of teaching that separates mental health from demon possession. I think that's the first step, so that people can relearn what mental health is. And then two, identify that we can't pray this away. There is need for prayer and therapy, prayer and treatment. And then we'll begin to sort of see parents or church leaders working with children differently, understanding children's behaviors differently, as it relates to mental health, which I think is even more crucial now because we're seeing so many more children committing suicide. There is a huge increase in children's suicide. Just last week, another, I think, 10-year-old kid committed suicide, and it's much more prevalent now than it's ever been. And so the church has a huge responsibility at this point to address mental health in an effective way so that we can save our children.
I'm trying to think of, other religions that may not be based on Christianity. Do they have a better picture? Have you found anything in research that supports or that, other religions may have a different picture, more positive, oriented towards mental health? Or is it, most religions just do not believe in, going to therapy?
I am not sure. I haven't done the research on other beliefs. So I'm not quite sure if there's an orientation to mental health outside of the Christian faith. If I were to make an assumption, I would probably say it's probably the same across the lines. But I don't know for sure. I haven't done that specific research.
That's fine. Now, your research also is based upon race trauma, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is the church any better than the other political or social systems in the world? Or is it also aiding towards race trauma? And if it is, how can it change?
So for clarity, we're talking about the Adventist church, right?
You can expand if you have more expansive research. That's fine with me. But yes, of course, Adventism is one of the main points of this podcast. So yes, enlighten the conversation within the Adventist church. But if you have other data of other churches that we can model after, or that can model after us, I don't know what your answer is going to be. So, share.
I like that we could talk about Adventism here. So I think our denomination is no better than the other political systems. Why? When Adventism came into being, what was happening in the world at that same time? When we look at civil rights, when we look at Jim Crow laws, slavery, all through those different stages of, American history, what role did the Adventist church play? Our church has a really ugly and harsh history that we suppress, that we erase, that we minimize. I've been talking a lot about Lucy Bayard, who was an African-American woman in Washington, D.C., who went to the Adventist hospital for treatment and was turned away because of the color of her skin, because she was a Black woman, from our institution. And eventually died because they sent her to the public hospital across town, and she eventually died. And
Hmm.
so that's just one story of so many within our denomination where racism was ugly and real and present, and we don't talk about it. Up until present day, just looking at how our church is structured, the need for regional conferences, which came out of Black leaders at that time wanting to be included and join with white brethren, and being turned away and saying, no, we couldn't worship together, but allowed to form Black Black conferences and Black congregations. Ellen G. White, I just did a presentation last week. Ellen G. White talks a lot to the church about the treatment of colored folk within Adventism at that time. She talked a lot about the need for the church to be present in the South, educating Black individuals, and being very present in the work of social justice to communities of color. And so even now, when we look at representation within our church administrative leaders from the world level all the way down, what do we see? And so there's definitely a replica of similar institutionalized racism themes within our denomination that is very present. And so I don't necessarily see the church as any different to what we see in society at this point. There's still a lot of themes surrounding white supremacy in terms of culture and worship and style and access, right? And so I think that our church has to be really honest, and we have to have hard conversations about our history, about how people of color have been treated within our denomination, and create equitable changes within our denominational structure, our leadership, our schools. We're seeing so many stories of just really racially driven, racially motivated incidents on our Adventist school campuses, from
Hmm.
Walla Walla to Andrews to, just our different universities. And so it's present and it's there. And we have to do some truth telling about racism within our own denomination.
Now, how is that specifically affecting those who will be? I mean, based on the research that you have done, I've heard, this story that the images that you're kind of putting vividly, like, Lucy Bayer, regional conferences, about 3 times now from different presenters, different people that we have interviewed. And it seems to me that those are kind of like some of the main frameworks. However, how is that related towards the mental health ideas or, mental health state of the members in our church? And how would changing those things affect? Like, I mean, I don't know if you kind of have that kind of a little bit intersection, or maybe study that you have seen, done, or have heard from other people that can help the mental health state of our church members.
Yeah, I mean, I think that treatment across the line includes like church members, right? So a lot of times I feel like in church places we have the church and the community conversation, but the church is the community and the community is the church. And so even in the research and what the data shows, like that includes many of us and many of our members who exist within these communities where research is being done. And so I think everyone is impacted. And I think even within church spaces, why I view it as doubly almost bordering dangerous is because the mental health conversation is compounded by the spiritual conversation and the teaching. And so that makes it even more, I think, enmeshed and really difficult to flush out, where we have a lot of church members that are struggling in silence. who are suicidal, who are depressed, who are anxious, who are really, really struggling with their lives, with their mental health, with their sense of being, from leaders to lay members. And so it's almost taboo. And so I think the church is a key institution to change the conversation around mental health, not only for its members, but for its community, because the church is a staple in community. And so that can look like teachings, sermons on mental health, having on-site counselors. I think every church should have that on a weekly basis, because people come into church, pastors preach about all sorts of things, from childhood to life to experiences. We pull a lot of different themes and stories from the Bible, and people are triggered. People sit in our congregations on Sabbath and they are triggered. But they have nowhere to go with that. They have nothing to do with that, because they don't want to appear unspiritual by saying, I am struggling, I am feeling depressed, I'm feeling anxious, I'm here, but I had suicidal thoughts last night. There's nowhere to go with that. And so we have to create spaces to hold small groups that address mental health. Maybe doing some scales and some surveys to just sort of see what is present, see what is prevalent, connecting with professionals in your congregation to be present, and to begin to create avenues for people to feel comfortable in having mental health challenges, because we all do. You know, if the statistics show that 1 in 3 or 1 in 5, then that means in our church on any given Sabbath, half of our congregation has a mental health diagnosis. Do they get treatment for it? No. Statistics also show that about 59% of individuals with a mental health diagnosis does not receive treatment. And so we have to flush apart, why is that? More than half of the individuals in America with a mental health diagnosis or with mental health systems do not receive treatment. And a part of that is spiritual teaching that tells people that it is wrong, that it is bad, and that we shouldn't have these experiences. So people are just sitting in their stuff and not getting the help they need. And we come in and out of church week after week, and we're not really experiencing the transformation, because spirit and soul goes together. The Bible says, God says, I wish above all things that you may prosper and be in good health, even as your soul prospers. And so if your spirit is not able to prosper, then how can you truly experience the manifestation of God's power in your life? And so as a church, we have a whole lot of work to do.
I appreciate your comments. I think that definitely there is a lot to learn, and there is a lot to look into as, you know, administrators, maybe pastors. I know certain conferences have a mental health pastor actually for their, you know, employees. And I think that's, you know, that's something that needs to be replicated throughout. Like, you know, like a dedicated pastor that literally travels and gives therapy, like a therapy pastor, for other pastors or, you know, administrators. So I think that that's maybe one way of looking into the future. As you say, I think maybe having a mental health professional, of course, like a counselor available to churches will be magnificent. Now, of course, we have budget issues and things like that, and we'll have to definitely work out redistribution in order to come to a more accessible means for that person to travel around and help parishioners, of course. Maybe one more area before we tune out that I would like to explore with you and kind of like you maybe tell us is, how can one start breaking the barriers, you know, like not necessarily from the institutional perspective and, you know, changing all of those things and allowing for language or, you know, giving sermons, but from a personal perspective, how can I today start, you know, walking towards a better mental health state? How can I do it from, just myself, what's one step that you will recommend, or a couple of steps that you recommend for people to, kind of wake up to this need that they may have?
Yeah, I think everyone needs at least one counseling session. Call your insurance company, find out if you have insurance. I don't want to assume. Find out if behavioral health is covered under your plan and schedule at least one session. And I'll tell you why. We all come with stuff. We all have issues that has impacted our thoughts, our mind, our behaviors in some way, shape, or form. And I think being able to sit with someone who can help you just kind of flush out and categorize experiences and understand how it might be impacting your functioning is the best. Well, let me not say it's the best, but is an extremely beneficial approach. And so I think each individual, we all owe it to ourselves to have at least one counseling session and see where it goes from there. Now, of course, I don't think counseling is the only treatment approach, right? And so I think finding ways for self-care is important. I think utilizing the platforms that we have to normalize mental health is other things that we can do. Like you're using this platform of a podcast. We can all just kind of check in with the people around us and create spaces for our friends and our family members to start talking about, hey, are you okay? Like, have you been sad lately? Like anything making you anxious? I think the more we're able to find ways to normalize mental health, and create conversations around it, it will be incredible to see what it opens up, not just for us as individuals, but for the people around us. And I think just kind of doing some research and if you are, if you've been having a particular experience, maybe talking to your healthcare professional about it. But I think the best thing that we can all do as individuals at this point is to start having conversations about mental health so that we can normalize it. We are only seeing conversations really surface at points where individuals may have committed or died rather by suicide. And so everyone talks about mental health at that point, and then the conversation dies down. And so we have to make this a normal aspect of our life, a normal aspect of our conversation. But I would really encourage everyone to at least schedule one therapy session for yourself, just a checkup, just a check-in, just like you go to the doctor for your annual checkup. Your mental health drives everything else. The mind is incredibly powerful. And so that's definitely what I would leave people with.
Awesome. Thank you for that. I think that that's definitely a good idea. Like, that maybe people can practice. I think it could be really helpful for everyone. And I guess I'm due for that mental health checkup myself. So, definitely will take that into consideration. And of course, insurance does play a little bit of that. That's another part of the conversation that we may not have time for, but, maybe also check up. Maybe you have friends that are counselors or, friends of friends, for the confidentiality and all of that. But maybe friends of friends that can help. There's always, a connection somewhere. Well, Tiffany, thank you very much for this conversation. You really helped us understand a little bit more about the therapy world. And I really appreciate you sharing a couple of details, in some of the areas that we may need to explore as people and as a community of faith. Definitely that will be helpful. As it is our custom here at Disruptive, we like to give the final thoughts, final comments to our guests. So please give us a little bit of the final word on what about therapy do we need to know, or any other comment that you have.
I mean, I would just say, listen, we are all struggling with something, whether it's from our childhood experiences that we've carried along the way. Every person that you meet has some sort of challenge as it relates to our mental health. We're humans. This is just what happens. I believe that God wants us to experience the most powerful manifestation of his power in our lives. And so let's all go for it. Let's all reach for it. And let's take care of ourselves and take care of each other.
You've been listening to Disruptive Adventism. We hope that today's topic helped you to think and change something about your practices, about your faith, about your Adventism. If you want to subscribe, make sure to go to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, or wherever you get your podcast. We'll be there. And make sure to give us a review if you like what you're listening to. If you want to support, make sure to go to patreon.com/disruptiveadventism. It helps us pay our bills and produce the content that you're listening to. And if you want to socialize, make sure to like us on Facebook, follow us on Instagram or on Twitter, and hit us up whenever you need anything. We'll be there to support you. Thank you for listening today. We hope you join us next time. And as always, we invite you to be disruptive.
Producing content, not easy. Creating a business plan to reach the masses, even harder. That's why Good To Go Media is hosting Collab Media and Film in Redlands, California, this September 8 and 9, where you, the content creator, can learn all about business plans, distribution, legal guidelines, and more. Presenters like Mark Butler and Randy Jameson will walk you through the tough parts of the content creation process. And if you need a financial boost for your project, the event is having a pitch competition where you can receive a prize of up to $20,000 to bring your ideas to life. Go to goodtogomedia.org to register and use code DISRUPTIVE for 20% off your ticket. Again, goodtogomedia.org, discount code DISRUPTIVE.